I'm going to show you an absolutely incredible game played in round 4 of the Chennai Masters as the two tournament leaders are playing against each other. It's Tabatabaei from Iran playing with the white pieces against Arjun Erigaisi. And I really think you need to give yourself a break now to watch the following absolutely madness which is taking place on these 64 squares. It's an absolute joy, and I hope if you're not learning something, at least you're going to enjoy tremendously. What a game it is, guys. If you would like to see more exciting games, make sure to come back to the channel by subscribe and like this video. Thanks for doing that. Here we go. Tabatabaei starts with 1e4, e5. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4 is the Italian opening. Knight f6, d3, bishop c5. A lot of different systems here available for both sides. So let's quickly go through the opening. Starts off very calm, but not for long, as white is going to grab some space on the queen side, typically by pushing his pawns to a4 and b4. Maybe at the right moment he can break with b4, b5, who knows? And what is black going to do? Well, you'd probably expect black just to play solidly here with castling kingside. Well, that didn't happen. Then you don't know Arjun Erigaisi yet. He plays in an absolutely really sharp, probably the sharpest possible way with the move g7, g5. This is not an uncommon idea, but very often this g-pawn is launched in situations where white has already committed himself to the move h3, so that you can play g4 and open up the g-file later for the rook. Now it's going to take much more time, more effort from black to open up the king side. White played here the move bishop e3, offering the exchange of dark squared bishops. So black takes, white takes back with the rook. And black has only one idea in mind, going for the kill. With the move g4 attacking the knight goes back to e1. And what is next? The h-pawn is coming. And as I said in the introduction, I'm not sure you're going to learn something from this game, because it's not something I would recommend all of you to try out in a game yourself. White is doing pretty well, normal development. And what is black doing? He's completely violating here the basic rules of opening play. Lot of pawn moves, keeping the king in the center. So launching an attack without being fully developed is usually an incredibly risky strategy. But does it work out in this game? Let's find out. White goes for d4, attempting to open up the center. Black continues with the move h4. The bishop goes back to e2, maybe a remarkable move. But you keep an eye on this pawn on g4. And well, very difficult position, very unusual position. So I think both players, they are really trying to find out actually what is going on. Black decided here to play the move queen e7. And it's a kind of a solid move. You overprotect the pawn. And here white decides to push the pawn to d5, to grab more space, to hit the knight. And where do you go with the knight? The knight has to go backwards. It went back to b8, which is more positional than going back to d8. So on d8 doesn't have many more squares to go to. Let's see what that knight has in mind. It's now on b8. Knight goes to d2. And here, the move queen f8. If you see this for the first time, it feels totally wrong to play in such a way. But black is trying to find a way to activate the queen. Knight f1 was played. It's a very modest move, but it's understandable that you place your knight next to the king to guard the pawn and to be ready for some pawn break by black on the king side. Queen h6. There's the queen. It's doubling up here with the rook. The file is still closed, but the queen also keeps an eye on the rook. Even though it's protected, there are some clear ideas. Let's find out. c4 played. That's where white should try to play for an advantage at the other side of the board. But now the move g3. This is incredibly sharp. Pawn takes g3. H takes g3. And this pawn can be captured in 3 different ways. If you take with a knight, that's just plain wrong. It's queen takes e3 and the rook is gone. That's not good. If you do take with a rook, then black is able to capture a very important pawn in the center with its knight. Also not so great. Maybe you can take with the h-pawn, but you know, it doesn't feel great to open up the h-file and give black, whenever he likes, the possibility to put the queen on h1. It's not made immediately, but it looks very shaky. So for that reason, Tabatabaei decided here to play the move h3, keep the position closed. Knight comes back into the game, knight bd7, white plays c5. Even though it's a pawn sacrifice, black should not be tempted to go for that pawn. It will really help the major pieces of white to create threats against black's pieces. So Erigaisi is directing his knight to the other side of the board. Knight f8. Interesting maneuver as the knight is on its way to g6. And what should white do? You would like to take with the rook at some point on g3, but then the pawn on e4 is hanging. If you do take with the knight, then the rook will be hanging. So maybe it would make sense here to go for rook a3, so that you may take with the knight on g3. But taking pawns, it's also very risky. It will open up more files towards the white king. So Tabatabaei had a different plan. He decided to take on d6. Black takes back. Queen c1. And here the queen is defending the rook on e3, hoping for a way to infiltrate. But now, guys, this is absolutely insane. I was following this game live, and I really didn't predict any of Erigaisi's move. And also the next move is absolutely unbelievable. Bishop takes pawn on h3. Now, this is a move, of course, you should look at. But after pawn takes h3, if you do take with the queen, threatening checkmate on h1, it's bishop f3, and everything is well covered. The bishop protects h1, the knight protects h2, and there's no mate yet. So after sacrificing the bishop and white captured it, black continued just like nothing has happened. Played here the move knight g6, just getting in another fantastic piece. And look, the knight is on his way to f4. Rook takes g3 was played. Very logical move, as you do offer the exchange of queens as well. But now the knight comes to f4, attacking the bishop. When you're even threatening a knight fork, if you do play bishop f3, moving the bishop away, it can be met by knight takes e4. Fantastic stuff, as the knight cannot be taken because of that same knight fork on e2. Black is winning the queen. So therefore, after knight f4, the queen comes into e3. Queen is coming back into the game, defending all the weaknesses. But now it's knight takes h3. And this looks incredibly dangerous, as there are no more pawns there guarding the king. If the king moves somewhere, the knight will come back to f4. And with the open h-file and the teamwork of queen and rook, mate is very nearby. So white probably relieved to trade off some pieces here by returning the material advantage, taking on h3. Queen takes. Now the queens are coming off the board. And we have this position with knight and bishop versus a rook and a pawn. Material is even, but a very unbalanced position and chances for both sides. First things first, as the pawn on e4 is hanging, bishop f3, defending the pawn. And now, what should black do? Make sure that white's rook will not get any more active. So rook is coming to c8. Very good move, controlling the open file. Rook b1. Now the rook comes into c3. So black is intending to take twice on f3, when he will be just a healthy pawn up in a rook and knight endgame. Knight d2 therefore played, overprotecting the bishop. Black puts the king on e7. And white marches forward with the a-pawn, fixing the pawns here. And obviously white is looking for a way to break through on the queen side to activate that rook on the b-file. Knight goes back to d7. Interesting move. If you push the pawn right now, then the knight can install itself on c5. It's a beautiful square, cannot be kicked away. It's defending everything. It's attacking the pawn on e4. Looks very good news for black. So white instead first played king f2. White has everything pretty well covered here. And how should black continue? That knight on d7 is looking okay, but not doing too much. And Erigaisi, ambitious as he is, goes for the move knight f8. Very, very nice plan. Like we have seen earlier, this knight maneuvering, the second knight is following the same path. With, after the move b5, the knight coming to g6. White is opening up the position. And here, knight is on its way to f4, maybe even h4 sometimes. Bishop g2, forcing the rook to go back. Rook goes to h6. Remarkable move, but quite a good one. As after the following sequence, rook check on b7. King goes back. Rook goes to b6 with a double attack. and black will be forced to give up one of these pawns. Now, the reason the rook is on h6 is that after knight f4, the pawn on d6 is well defended. So therefore the other pawn is captured. And the rook from c3 goes behind the passed pawn. And if you have been following my last tournament, I did get quite a number of interesting endgames where also it was shown that the rook should be placed behind that pawn. This pawn is in charge. It's absolutely under control, cannot cause any damage. But the rook got to stay there. And at the same time, it may look for opportunities to play against white's pieces. Rook a8 check, king g7. White is pushing the pawn to a6. Rook a2. Pinning the knight on d2. If you do protect it with your king, the rook will come back to h2. And there are huge problems here because you're threatening to take the bishop with your knight. If the bishop moves, then the knight on d2 is hanging. So that's not a good idea. Instead, the knight from e1 should come back into the game. Knight to f3. Defending that knight on d2. And now it looks like white is having nicely consolidated his position, but Erigaisi brings new energy to the board with fantastic resource. The move f5, challenging the pawn on e4. In case you do take the pawn, black plays e4. And black is in really good shape as the knight on f3 is under an attack. If it goes away, then the knight on d2 will be unprotected. So therefore white should not take. White played here rook a7 check, checking out where the king is going. King f8. And now another rook check. King g7, rook a7. And is black happy with a draw here? Well, Erigaisi played king f6, so he keeps the game going. Very interesting resource. Critical moment in the game, as there are a lot of interesting options here. And well, you have to deal with this threat of pawn takes e4. And white really wants to try to play out his own main asset. That pawn on a6 should become a queen very soon. But how to do that? Tabatabaei played here bishop f1, so that the bishop is going to support the pawn on a6. It's not a good move. I want to show you that probably rook d7 is a key idea to counterattack the pawn on d6. You don't care about the pawn on a6, because if that pawn is going to be taken, then bishop f1 is an excellent move, as you do hit the bishop with the rook on a6, and black has a lot of difficulties to keep that pawn defended, as rook may take soon, or the knight can come to c4. So that is one of the ideas. But I have to show you one other line, which is sort of a forcing sequence, it was all not played in the game, let it be clear. But if you take on e4, as rook takes d6 check, king goes away, rooks can come off the board. Still, the knight on f3 and the knight on d2 are in trouble. But if you do take here on e5, for instance, and now rook takes d2, there is king e3, rook takes g2, king takes f4, and probably after picking up the pawn on a6, you have to give up the rook for the d pawn as well. White can take on e4. This is going to be a draw. There's simply not enough material left on the board. But very complicated line. You see that with not so many pieces left on the board, there's still an incredible amount of resources available to both sides. Let's go back to the game. Bishop f1 played. Pawn takes e4. Now you see again, these knights are in trouble. But the reason the bishop went to f1 is to play bishop c4, to hit the rook. If you do play rook b2, then the rook can leave the a file with tempo, rook b7. And things are looking pretty good here for white, as the passed pawn is very dangerous. So instead of rook b2, much better move is rook c2, maintaining that pressure along the second rank. And well, after something like bishop b3, the rook can go to b2. The problems remain. There's no rook b7 this time, so black is winning material. Instead of bishop b3, rook d7 was played. And well, there are a lot of ideas here. Like, for instance, you want to take on d6 with check, trade off the rooks, and then run with the a-pawn. And it looks like, thanks to this bishop on c4, the black rook from c2 is no longer able to stop it. In any case, it shows that you should not take on f3 here. But the key move here, found by Erigaisi, is absolutely amazing. Rook h3. Black is playing for a mating attack with the 2 rooks, the knight and the pawn. For instance, if you push the pawn to a7, like you're 1 move away from queening that a pawn, there is rook takes f3 with check. The knight is pinned, cannot take the rook, king g1 for instance, and now it's rook takes d2. And there's no time to queen your a pawn as it does run into rook g2, check, king h1 and rook h3 with ladder mate on the g and h file thanks to the support of the knight on f4. Incredible line, but this is just winning if you do push the pawn. If you take the pawn on d6 instead, was also not played, there's this funny idea, like you move the king, and well, there are still these same ideas, and well, after king e3, trying to hide with the king somewhere, it's not really clear what's happening, but the cutest move here on the board is rook takes f3, knight takes f3, knight g2 with checkmate, and you see that even here with all black's pieces participating, also the king, you can just deliver checkmate in the middle of the board. Fantastic lines. I couldn't resist sharing these ideas with you. In any case, after rook h3, white played king e3 immediately. Pawn takes f3 played. And here again, a7 is simply too slow. There is this plan to push the pawn to f2 with discover check. And for instance, if you take the pawn, it's rook takes d2, king e1, rook g2, and here again the rooks are working together now from a different angle. And the mating idea is in the air. Like if you promote a pawn, it's just going to be checkmate by force. Again, exploiting a pin. It's the strength of the rooks in these endgames. King d1, rook takes f1 is another mating pattern with 2 rooks and a knight. In any case, after pawn takes f3, white played knight e4 check. King f5. And here again, the big threat, of course, is to play f2. Let's say if you do play a7, it's f2, discover check, and the white king has been caught in a mating net. After king f5, there followed knight takes d6 check. The king goes away, and still, the threat is there to push the f-pawn. Therefore, bishop f1 to hit the rook on h3. So f2 is no longer that attractive. But look at this. Another amazing resource in this endgame is the move rook e2 was played in the game. White resigned. There's nothing you can do here. After taking the rook, you take back with the f-pawn. Again, it's discover check. And the king can no longer stop the march of the e-pawn. If you do go to d2, it's rook d3 check. If the king goes away, you promote a pawn. If the king blocks, you go rook d1 check. King f2, e1 queen. And it's game over. Also, if the king goes to the other side, it's rook h2, king e1. And rook h1, and after the king goes away, you promote your e-pawn. Absolutely amazing game. And you see that if you play super aggressively, you can definitely intimidate your opponents. You see that Tabatabaei tried to play solid, but Arjun Erigaisi, his very aggressive approach paid off. Even he took a lot of risks, but you see it really pays off to play super aggressively. I really like this game. 3.5 out of 4 is a fantastic performance. And now Erigaisi is on 28.09 if I calculated correctly. He is a few points ahead of world's number 3, Fabiano Caruana, only 22 points behind Magnus Carlsen. So do we really get to see a new world's number 1 very soon? Exciting times for chess. Make sure to follow it all here on the channel by subscribing, liking this video, and see how you can support the channel. Thanks for that. See you soon again.